mitochondria, or as you might know them, as the powerhouses of the cell. Today we want to talk about some details about these organelles. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Mitochondria are double membrane-bound organelles within eukaryotic cells to produce, among other functions, ATP. They are an essential component within most eukaryotic organisms because they can produce ATP, which is the major energy resource within cells. And therefore we also call them powerhouses of the cell. They're actually relatively small, ranging between 0.75 and 3 micrometers, and they have to get stained to be seen under a microscope. They actually comprise two membranes, so an outer and an inner one, and those have different functions. We'll talk about that later. The number of mitochondria differs between cell types and is also dependent on the respective function. The liver, for example, can contain up to 2,000 mitochondria, while major red blood cells have none. And even though they are usually represented as bean-like, as it's also here, they're actually highly dynamic structures and they vary in looks. Now, a mitochondrion has an inner and an outer membrane. The outer space contains so-called porins, and those are large integral membrane proteins. They act, well, as the name suggests, as pores. There are different enzymes enclosed in it, and those are involved in various reactions, like for example degrading tryptophan, which is an amino acid. There's also an intramembrane space which lies, well, between the inner and the outer parts. The inner membrane is essential for synthesizing ATP and can also regulate metabolite passages throughout the mitochondria. Here we also have the so-called cristae, which are membrane foldings, and those are intended to enlarge the surface area. And the space that is enclosed by the inner membrane is called matrix. And here there's also the mitochondrial DNA, which we'll talk about in a minute in more detail. As said now several times, mitochondria are well known for synthesizing ATP, but they have numerous other essential functions. So, apoptosis, which is the programmed cell death. They can release a protein, cytochrome C, which in turn activates other proteins called caspases, which then initiate destruction of cells. Then we have hormonal and immune signaling. Here you see an antibody and here a general scheme for signaling cascades. They can react to hormonal changes, and another important aspect are that they produce reactive oxygen species, and those play crucial roles in cell signaling. Now, regulating proliferation. This is a current topic of research, but it is suggested that ATP levels can regulate cell division to a certain extent. Last but not least, they can store calcium, which is again essential in signaling cascades, for example for muscle contraction. Mitochondria can release it but also take it up. Now, mitochondria contain their own DNA, which is circular as you see here. There are only 37 genes compared to 20,000 from the genome in the nucleus. A distinctive and highly important feature of mitochondrial DNA is its maternal inheritance pattern, so all offspring have the same mitochondrial DNA. Therefore, it can get used to study evolutionary trends and is essential in fields like anthropology and evolutionary biology. And the reason why there are separate genomes is actually unknown. Now, there are numerous pathophysiological conditions which are associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. Those can get caused by damage to the mitochondrion itself, and here we know dysfunctions in brain, heart and kidney tissue, but there are also systemic disorders. It's also feasible that disorders are caused by mutation within the nuclear genome, which then cause dysfunctional products that get to the mitochondrion. And apart from the pathophysiology, we've already mentioned the reactive oxygen species. And oxidative stress in general is hypothesized to play a role in aging. This was a quick overview of this highly interesting organelle. If you want to know more about organelles, there are also a video about the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel to see weekly